Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, a podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a PhD candidate studying Neanderthal teeth. I'm here with two of my co-hosts. My only two co-hosts. I'm here with my co-hosts.
My name is Kim Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist and I study human skeletal variation and health and disease.
And I'm Ross Barnett, a paleogeneticist who studied Pleistocene felids.
You're super quiet, Ross.
Am I too quiet?
You always start off talking very quietly. Whenever you introduce yourself, I have to bump up your level in that part.
All right.
But then you get louder throughout the episode.
And more obnoxious.
As you get more emotionally involved.
So today we're reviewing Iceman again. We're reviewing a second Iceman movie. This one is a German movie that was released in Germany in 2017, but it was released in Canada and the United States in 2019. So it shows up with both dates online. Does one of us want to summarize this movie?
Sure, I can. So it is a fictional story based on a real neolithic mummy found in the Alps named Ötzi. And I don't think they call him Ötzi in the movie, though, right? His name starts with a K.
I think it's Caleb.
Yeah. And he is the leader of a clan, and he leaves that clan to go help a birthing mother in another nearby clan. And while he's gone, another group of people come in and murder and destroy his home and his wife and his son and his people. And so when he comes back just in time to see them walking away, so he knows who did it, and then he follows them trying to get vengeance, and it's kind of like a self-discovery piece about him trying to figure out what vengeance actually means and how important it is for him. I think that's what I got from it. Ross?
Yeah. I liked it. Thought it was kind of interesting.
Me too.
It was kind of like a kind of Neolithic revenge thriller. With all sorts of kind of interesting little kind of Easter eggs thrown in, and like you say, it's based on some kind of real archaeology for this Ötzi mummy that was found in the Ötztal Alps in 1991, and they've been able to kind of reconstruct some of his last days from the preservation of the mummy. And this is just like an explanation. We know that some stuff happened. You don't just end up dead on the side of the Alps for no reason.
No, he actually has a arrowhead lodged in between the vertebrae in his neck. So we know that he was murdered or killed from being shot from behind. Yeah,
which is a pretty sad way to go.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're watching this as an archaeologist or someone with an interest in prehistory, you basically got one massive spoiler for the ending just from knowing the history of that the individual the story's based on.
Throughout the movie, there was so many times that I thought it was going to end. Like they set it up where it could happen. You're like, oh my God, it's going to happen now. And then you're like, oh no, it didn't.
Yeah, I liked it. I think I liked it more than last week's Iceman. This is the better of the Iceman, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree too. I realized kind of halfway through I was watching it that I didn't even look to see if subtitles were on. I just listened to it as if they were speaking a language I didn't know. And so, was there subtitles? Did you watch it with subtitles?
I didn't look either. I kind of approached it as, apocalypto style, that, it's meant to be universal enough that it doesn't matter what they're saying. It's all about the kind of action rather than what they're saying. But I thought it was interesting at the beginning. It said that they were speaking Radian, which, as far as I know, is like an Iron Age Italian Alps area language. So it's probably about 2,000 or 3,000 years too young to have been what these guys were speaking. But at least they tried to find something that was old and geographically consistent with these guys.
Well, they could have been speaking some kind of proto language, like the ancestral language to that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you guys both like this movie, because I didn't like this movie. I thought it was just boring. I thought there was not really a movie to it.
There were times that I was like, okay, let's move this along. But I thought it was quite beautiful.
They could have started a little bit before his death and built out a little bit more of his life. It's just everyone's dead. Now I got to go kill the bad guys. I killed the bad guys. Now I'm dead. Nothing really happens.
But it's not. I mean, it's not really like that. It's almost a bit Pulp Fiction, where you're trying to find what's in the briefcase. His magic, what's it called, Tanaka, this kind of cult object that he has, which he kind of opens and nobody can see what it is, and you only find out towards the end what it actually is. But that's why all the kind of family members get killed, because these guys are actually wanting to steal Tanaka, whatever it is. We're kind of left confused as to what it is. I mean, I've kind of scribbled down notes saying that I thought it could have been, copper or some other kind of metal in that box that was like really important. This sort of kind of neolithic, sort of copper age transition kind of stuff going on. That maybe metal was the thing that these guys were fighting over.
Well, I googled it, so I know what it is.
Well, we see it at the end.
Yeah, but what it symbolizes.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's supposed to be obsidian, isn't it? I thought that's what I read.
Yeah.
But what is it supposed to symbolize?
It's a religious symbol, so his house was the shrine to, I think it's the goddess, Tanaka is the god, which I thought it was really interesting that there would be this singular religion or belief among pretty farly geographically separated small Neolithic clans.
But if it's just obsidian, it kind of seems weird that these guys, kill a whole bunch of people over it, because...
Well, it's because of the religious significance.
But you could get another bit. I mean, it's in a nice box, but you could make another nice box. I don't know.
Yes. But it's the same with any religious thing now.
True.
Like as soon as somebody says that it's important and that's the thing that should be worshipped, then it becomes unique. And so that's what I got, because I was a bit confused by it. So I looked it up on like the plot line, and it was supposed to be Tanaka is the god.
Okay.
And so that would be from the shrine of Tanaka, and then, yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that there's bits that I didn't like as well. I mean, there's stuff that annoyed me. Kind of first off, I'm going to get annoyed when all these kind of ancient peoples always have really, really, really bad hair, which just strikes me as completely unlikely. That personal grooming has always been like a massive issue for humans.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try and stick with our regular format and start off with the inaccuracies. So the hair and the ratty clothes. Yeah. That's the first thing that stuck out to me as well. Yeah.
Definitely the pigs that they have are not like the pigs they would have had in the Neolithic. I'm not entirely sure when goats become part of the kind of domesticated animals. I think it's probably okay in terms of time-wise, but I mean, they would have looked more like their wild ancestors than these clearly, Wiltshire or whatever kind of breed it is that they actually have in their pens. Oh, and another annoying thing about the clothes, I thought, was that they always have these guys in furs with the hair on the outside, which is stupid, because
I know
the hair should be on the inside, because that's what makes it warm.
I know, but they make it like modern fashion where the fur is the look, right?
In one of the early scenes before everyone in the village is murdered, a woman's working at a loom, but nobody's wearing woven clothes. They're all wearing skins. Why? What was she doing with that loom? What was that for?
For export only.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Everybody seems to be living such isolated lifestyles, but Neolithic people would have had extensive trade networks. And like, if my village was massacred and the only person who survived was a little infant, and I wanted to go off on a revenge spree, the first thing I would do was to take the baby to a nearby village where I know somebody and say, hey, I have to go murder some people, please take this baby. But he took the baby with him through half of his journey and left it with some random people he met. There doesn't seem to be any connections between these peoples. The murder is also passed by those people, and nobody seems to know anybody. Every interaction is tense, but there are no allies anywhere.
Yeah. Especially since he had helped deliver a baby at what would be assumed to be a nearby village that they were on friendly terms with. Yeah. So that would be where you take the baby, because that's where she has breast milk.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a pretty fair exchange. He helped them birth their baby. They look after his baby.
I thought that was the baby I thought that was the same baby in his own village. I thought that was his clan.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like the elder or shaman or healer in the village.
I thought he had gone away to help deliver the baby, and that's why he was away from the village when it happened. No?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite confusing. I kind of assumed that, like Josh, that the baby was part of the same group, even though it was in a house slightly further away. But he was away from the village because he was like hunting or something. He'd gone off in a huff like the next morning, and sort of his wife or partner was looking longingly out of the window at him as he disappeared off to do something important. Maybe a part of the ritual, like the next day they have to hunt something for the newborn or something. I mean, it's all part of the problem that I guess that because a lot of it is from suggestion and from kind of context without any understanding of what's been spoken or what's been said, then there's a lot of room for misinterpretation as well as interpretation, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it was all pretty intense. I think it was quite easy to lose the thread.
Especially the scene of the village being destroyed was really heart-wrenching.
Yeah, I mean, it shows... I mean, there is, I guess, a bit of evidence for Neolithic being quite a brutal time for some people. But yeah, it was pretty...
And humans are brutal.
Yeah.
There's no reason to assume we wouldn't have been back then, too.
But yeah, to see that was quite rough.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, that brings back to the Tanaka thing, because obviously they didn't seem to be interested in very much in the village except for Tanaka.
Yeah.
And so then that means if that was a religious symbol for God, then obviously that singular idea of that religion is consistent throughout that area for Neolithic clans, which would be interesting. So like the first organized religion almost, like not just the one clan has one person, a small type religion, but it's obviously spread through different family groups.
There were some bits that I also got confused by. So when he's found them all kind of killed and he finds the baby and he takes the baby with him and he disappears off chasing these bad guys, I got really confused when he kind of stumbles across this tied up guy and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on there. Was that just another group that the bad guys had sort of brutalized on the way?
That's what I got from it, yeah.
Because he killed someone there thinking it was the bad guys, though it wasn't. Or was it?
Oh, I thought it was. I thought it was one of the three bad guys.
I was so confused by that part.
Because the other guys, like, they heard the scream and the other guy wanted to go back, and then the older guy was like, no, just leave him.
My understanding was that was another group that the bad guys had kind of brutalized on the way and had tied up one of them, and he accidentally killed somebody that was essentially totally innocent, thinking it was one of the bad guys. And that's the only way I can explain the ending and who actually shoots him in the end, because he's killed all the bad guys in their kind of home village.
Yeah, true.
So my understanding was that it was one of so there was three guys, one tied up and two hanging around. Or were they totally separate? I mean, it sort of made sense if you didn't think about it too much. But as Josh says, there's a lot of confusing points in there.
Well, it just kind of seems like there's a lot of solo men walking aimlessly around the Alps shooting each other, looking for other men to hunt, is what it feels like. Everybody has their own vengeance mission.
It's very Lord of the Rings, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
A dearth of female characters and a lot of walking.
Using the prehistoric language it's a nice idea to say, hey, you don't like, we'll be scientifically accurate, you don't need to actually understand because we're just going to act and direct so well that it's clear, but it was totally never clear to me what was happening. And the guy that shoots him at the end is a new character. I didn't recognize him, right? Like, he wasn't anywhere else in the movie, was he?
Well, I thought he was one of the,
I think he was,
the
wasn't
three.
he?
The only way I could explain it was that he was, of the two guys that what we're going to call the guy, Caleb, or whatever he's called. So when Caleb's chasing the bad guys and he finds that one tied up dude, and there's two other guys there, and he kills one of them and one of them escapes. Do you remember that
I thought that he killed both of them?
Mm-hmm.
I thought he killed one of them and one of them was just sort of stunned and then kind of escaped. And then he releases the tied up guy. So I thought he was kind of getting revenge for
But if that guy was chasing him all the way, like, the chase doesn't make a lot of sense to me because so many times the three main bad guys gets a big head start. Like, they get a full day's head start on him because he holds a funeral for his wife before he leaves. He sleeps on it and then holds a funeral and then starts out the next day. They've got a full day ahead of him. And then he catches up with them, but then they do the fake-out ending where he falls through the ice when you think they're going to have a big showdown, and then he falls through a crack in the ice and gets stuck. Then he's down there for like a good 10 minutes of the movie trying to get out, which must translate to at least another half a day. And then he catches up with them again. And then at the end, when he finally gets them, he spends the night at their village before he starts back home, presumably back in the opposite direction. So if this guy that he that escaped from him early in the movie was chasing him, then why wouldn't he have caught up with him at every one of those points and killed him right there? When he was, like, especially when he was through a hole in the ice on the verge of death anyway.
Well, somebody helped him out. Who was that guy that helped him out? That was the guy he untied? Yeah.
So I wasn't so worried about the idea that the bad guys had a head start. I mean, obviously these guys will have pretty good tracking skills, and a day or 2 day head start won't really be that much of an issue when there's all their kind of spoor to follow. But yeah, definitely it could have been a lot clearer as to what was going on with that tied up guy. I mean, there was a lot of kind of discussion and kind of action going on there, but it wasn't really explained why he'd been tied up. Were they going to eat him? Were they going to sell him? Were they going to what? Yeah. I mean, maybe it would have been good if they'd done something similar to Apocalypto, where they did have, people speaking in their native language, but they also had subtitles, and then, not give us the option of turning the subtitles off. Maybe that would have been how to do it.
I think that they got lazy with that, or they thought they could get away with something, because there's a lot of language in the first third of the movie, and then after that, everybody just sort of stops talking to each other. So, like, he unties the guy, they sort of look at each other, and he's scared, and he's sort of working through what's happening, and then he ends up running away. In real life, if you untied somebody, like, hey, what were you doing here? Why'd they tie you up? What's happening? Don't worry, I'm a friend. Like every interaction in the last 2/3 of the movie just seemed very inhuman to me. When he was fighting with the guys, he's just like, ah. When he gets shot at the end with the arrow, he just goes, ah. Like, I mean, you would say something.
Well, maybe that's something in Ratic that we just don't understand.
I mean, it can't be more than one word, right? So he's just saying one word to everybody.
Well, it might be the F word.
Yeah. And then also at the end, he kills the killers basically as soon as they get back to their own camp, where they also have a wife and kids there. And so you have the parallel where he's not going to be what the bad guys were because they killed his whole village. He's just getting revenge on them, but he's not going to get revenge on the women and children. But then he carries the bodies to the funeral pyre for her. He helps her conduct the funeral of the men that he just murdered, and then sleeps a very tense night in her own hut, where she wakes him up in the middle of the night contemplating murdering him, and then doesn't happen. But there's no dialogue spoken between the two of them, and I just can't imagine any interaction in the world where you murder a woman's husband and then help her conduct the funeral and then spend the night in her house and then leave and nobody says a word to each other. It was just so weird.
I mean, I guess, the way I kind of interpreted it was that there was some kind of, for the time, universal societal code as to that's what happens. If you kill someone's, wife and kids, then you get killed. That's it. And you have to give them hospitality because they were in the wrong, or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of suggestions of kind of a very different culture going on right from the start, where they have, a very different attitude to sex, where they kind of open houses and it's not kind of hidden away. And there's also suggestion that they're kind of living in kind of polygamous groups with kind of shared partners kind of stuff going on as well. And then, all the thing with Tanaka, and, it's trying to paint like a kind of culture that's has familiar faces in it, but is completely alien to what we deal with today. So that's what I was going for. And every time, yes, maybe it is just lazy filmmaking, but every time something was difficult to understand, it's like, well, it's a very different culture. And that was how you explained it.
Maybe it's because this movie is temporally well beyond my focus, since my focus is Pleistocene, Paleolithic. This is Neolithic, so as far as I'm concerned, this guy is, fundamentally identical to us today. It's like, if we're looking at movies about Neanderthals, we can speculate on them being different, but these guys are just humans. I don't know why they would behave in a way that seems inhuman to me, like, notwithstanding cultural differences. Just like humans everywhere talk to each other. We've talked about that in the other episodes about how important language is and how we're depicting ancient people. And it just seems so weird to me that people would just not talk to each other and not try to talk to each other in all these situations. Maybe we should talk about what this movie gets right, because in contrast to the other movies we've talked about, this one is about an actual archaeological find, and they do have a lot of details to work with. But Ötzi is not my my area of expertise. So do either of you know more about Ötzi than I do?
I've actually seen him.
Wow.
I've been
Okay.
to the Bolzano and seen him.
That's cool.
It was really cool.
You should have led with that, Kim.
Sorry. He's in this like temperature, climate, moisture controlled dark room, and you have to go and you have to look through these sailor windows just to see him. And so you don't get that great of a view of him. But it's all just to try and keep him exactly at the right level to be preserved still. And they have a specialized ambulance completely decked out just for him. That's all that same climatized everything, so that if something happens like an earthquake or a fire or something, there's a whole team that are constantly on standby just for Ötzi. So he'll be the safest in the town. So they'll go in,
Even though he's been dead for 4,300 years.
yeah. So they've done really well to make sure that he's not going anywhere. But they got it quite right in that the food in his stomach, so he was so well preserved that they were actually able to see what his last meal was, which was, I believe, a mutton and grain. And he also had a lot of what seemed to be medicinal herbs in his stomach, as well as in a pouch that he had with him, which supports the kind of suggestion that they were making in the movie that he was kind of a healer, or they had that power, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
I only have one good Ötzi fact, which I can share with everyone right now, which is that Brad Pitt has a tattoo of Ötzi on his arm. Did you guys know that?
Really?
He's,
No.
like on his
I
forearm.
wonder how that
Because
looks.
the distinctive pose of Ötzi is kind of like that, with his one arm over the other, and the outline's really kind of distinct.
Yeah.
And well, Brad Pitt's got that. God knows why he's got it, but he does.
Huh.
And that's it. That's my one good Ötzi fact.
Yeah, and Ötzi actually does have tattoos. So that was kind of the first sign that Neolithic people by that point, so where they were tattooing themselves. And it's unclear what the tattoos mean. They think from their placement, I believe he has them on his fingers and his shoulders and his arms and on his hips. And so the placement they think might have to do with arthritis or some kind of healing that way. Or it could just be a symbol of some kind.
But if it's like kind of, medical tattooing kind of stuff, that would also tie in with the idea that he's a shaman or a healer that has access to that kind of, skills.
Yeah, exactly. And if he was a shaman or a healer, it would make sense why he was traveling the Alps potentially by himself. Like, he may not have been by himself. Obviously, the people around him could have survived, but the picture that you get looking at the stuff that he was carrying and everything was kind of a lone traveler. The same the way the movie depicted, right? He had things on him.
I think they did a good job, definitely, of trying to include everything that they've got from the archaeology of the body in the film. Like Kim was saying, the medicinal herbs and the last meal in his stomach, but also with the kind of specialist tools that he had. So I think I remember reading somewhere that he had the remains of what's it called? Some kind of special fungi that's really good at holding embers and using to restart fires. And it kind of shows them in the film essentially doing that, kind of wrapping up the ember and putting that in his pocket so he can take it with him as a kind of fire lighting kit. So I think they definitely put in a lot of effort to. They've done more than just read the research. They've kind of understood it and tried to put it into the film.
Yeah, with his clothing too seemed pretty accurate because he was wearing the hide shoes and boots and leggings and just layers of clothes made of hides and furs.
Before we move on from the tattoos, though, like, he was pretty heavily clothed most of the movie, except for the scene where we first meet him. He's in the middle of having sex, and it's dimly lit, and you don't get a good look. But I was looking as hard as I could for the tattoos, and I couldn't find any.
Yeah.
I believe he's supposed to have a tattoo on his lumbar back, and that was the shot that I could see the clearest when he's getting up out of bed. I didn't see the tattoos there, and I was just so disappointed that, like, that's one of the well-known things about him lately, that it's just disappointing that they didn't include that.
Yeah, it would have been an easy thing to include. And it's quite important in terms of the finding. I mean, we would have, I don't think, ever had the suggestion that tattooing was a thing in Neolithic times until Ötzi.
Yeah, I mean, he's the only kind of Neolithic mummy that we have. Definitely the best preserved, but I think he's the only one that's ever been found.
Yeah, well, there's bog bodies.
Oh, yeah.
But their bog bodies are later, though, right?
Later.
Bronze.
They put a lot of emphasis on his axe, which is one of the real artifacts he was found with, and it's made of yew with a natural sort of 90-degree bend in it with a copper blade on the end. And I think that combined with isotope analysis of his hair, they think that he was probably involved in copper smelting, but I didn't see any evidence of metalworking in his clan there, so I thought they could have included that. Considering that they had a loom and they had pottery and all these different kinds of things, but apart from his copper axe, I didn't see... It wasn't clear how he made that axe. Yeah.
There's very little metal in the film at all, really, and that's why I thought that's what was in the Tanaka box. What was also interesting as well, talking about the evidence that there was in his village, that there seemed to be like a suggestion that they were quite settled, that their buildings that they lived in were pretty permanent looking, made from wood and sort of stuck in place and not really very transportable. Whereas the baddies, when you get back to their village, they're living in kind of quite easily collapsible dwellings that could be sort of put down at a moment's notice, which they're definitely trying to suggest that there's different cultural groups even within what is like a fairly small geographical area, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there could be family groups that rely on the agriculture and domestication, and then there's some that are like pirates that rely on other people's agriculture and domestication.
Yeah.
I forgot about the houses, though. That the houses annoyed me because they were sort of log cabiny with like very thin logs, but there was no like mortar between them. There were like wide open spaces where the light was coming through, and then like the winter wind is going to be coming through as well. Like it looked like the kind of tree fort I would have built when I was 10 years old. It didn't seem like a good house to live in the Alps to me. It seemed like a good cinematic look to have the rays of sunlight coming through the wall, but not very practical.
Yeah, no, that would have been way too cold. But you would want, I guess, smoke to get out a little bit. But, I mean, there's a lot of indication throughout archaeology, even pre-agriculture, that there was a lot of smoke pollution affecting people. So they have inflammation in their sinuses and stuff from probably living in shelters where their smoke was just accumulating.
I mean, even just like 150 years ago, 100 years ago in the part of Scotland where I live, people would live in black houses which were stone built with a thatched roof, and they just have an open fire in the middle of the house, and then the smoke just goes out either through a small hole directly above the fire or through the thatch itself. So yeah, you don't need to have kind of drafty walls to let smoke out. You want it to be going straight up rather than basically smoking all the inhabitants that are living in the house. I wonder, I didn't notice in the credits, but do they have any kind of archaeological consultants on the film? They must have done, surely.
I don't know. They must have had someone that understood, that at least went to the museum and read a book, right?
The idea that his death was violent, sort of in the way it played out, is at least very plausible, because in addition to having been shot with an arrow, they also found 4 different people's blood on his artifacts and clothing. So he had a stone knife and arrows, and one of the arrows had blood from 2 different people on it, and his knife also had someone's blood, and then he had a 4th person's blood on his clothes.
Yeah.
So there's definitely evidence of some kind of violence going on shortly before his death.
I would be very suspicious of that result. I mean, so this would have been done in the mid-90s, which was the worst possible time to be doing any kind of ancient DNA or ancient protein work, especially on humans. So I haven't read the paper where it discusses that, but I would say that the likelihood is that some of that results would be non-replicable, that it could just be lab contamination or beyond the realistic limits of the technology that they had at the time to determine that. It's always struck me as slightly unlikely that one person would have been able to have 4 distinctly identifiable human blood markers. I mean, these have to be quite distantly related individuals for them to be able to identify that. And with the technology that was around in the mid-90s, that would have been a very, very complex set of experiments to run. I mean, it makes for, you can see that they've tied that into his blood. All that blood's there because he slaughtered that whole village of baddies, but it could have just been from some of the lab workers or the archaeologists that handled the material, that kind of stuff.
I guess that's still a problem. Did you read this paper from last month where they were extracting DNA from a tooth from China from about 100,000 years ago? And they got human DNA from it, but it turns out it was a deer tooth.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's a classic. I mean, they've been doing those kind of experiments at least since the early 2000s. There's one I remember where they set it up really nicely. It was actually quite a funny paper. I think it was Mickey Hofreider's group and Nadine Rowland looking at, it was explaining how to do extraction from teeth. And it went through all the stages. Said we extracted from the tooth, we got a human sequence, we extracted again, got the same human sequence. That was great. We were just about to publish, but then this was actually a cave bear tooth. So, something's gone a bit wrong there. And it just shows you how ubiquitous contamination is in any kind of ancient genetic work, that even if you are able to repeat it, you could just be repeating the contamination that you're getting. And that's the biggest problem in ancient DNA work is the fact that human DNA is bloody everywhere. And that's why I've never worked on humans.
But yeah, I mean, that part played into the archaeological or the interpretation that Ötzi was running away when he was killed. So that he was running from a fight or something like that.
Yeah, I guess if he's been shot in the back, then he must be trying to get away from someone.
Well, I mean, that situation where he's running and then shot from a distance is what people have been suggesting. So I was kind of waiting each time for them to set up that position, because there's quite a few times where people could have shot him in the back very easily. And I was like, oh, it's going to happen. But then there was still half an hour left of the movie. And you're like, okay, well, I don't know what we would do with half an hour. But yeah, poor Ötzi. You assume maybe he was an asshole. I don't know. Maybe he had it coming.
Yeah. Maybe he stole Tanaka from those guys in the first place.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe we were rooting for the wrong character all the way through.
I was kind of wondering if now 4 episodes in, we want to talk about the title of our podcast here, Screens of the Stone Age. We throw around the word Stone Age, but maybe we should talk about what that actually means. Because the first 3 movies we watched all took place, or they had to do with Paleolithic people. This is the first movie we're looking at where we're dealing with a Neolithic person. So do we want to define what the Stone Age is and what the Paleolithic and Neolithic are?
So there's Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic, which is Old Stone, Middle Stone, and New Stone, which all together make the Stone Age.
And the difference between them is that the Paleolithic is almost all of human time, and then the Mesolithic is where you start having pottery, and then the Neolithic is where you start having agriculture.
Yes.
And then right at the end of that is where you get into the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. And so this movie is set right on the boundary of the Stone Age, because it's a Copper Age society that they're living in here, because they've got copper, but they still use all the rest of his tools were stone.
Yeah, so he's right at that transition.
Yeah, as soon as they figured out how to mix tin or whatever in with the copper to get bronze, then it transitions into Bronze Age.
And bronze is much stronger than copper, isn't it? That's why it's a better alloy.
Yeah. And Ötzi himself was dated to about 5,000 years ago, which is about 5,000 years after the start of agriculture was first developed. So it's pretty within. They've adapted to an agricultural life for quite a while. It's not new, so it's quite distant from the Paleolithic societies and life ways.
The Neolithic roughly starts around the end of the Ice Age, which is partly how agriculture was able to take hold, right? Because of changing climates.
Yeah.
But one thing that's almost kind of struck me is interesting, but weird. You're saying that, the Paleolithic is most of human history, but it's 2-3 million years is how this sort of span of the Paleolithic. And you've got the lower Paleolithic, which is, most of that, the middle Paleolithic, which is a little bit of it, and the kind of Epi-Paleolithic, which is a tiny amount. The Mesolithic lasts hardly any time at all, and the Neolithic's only 4,000 or 5,000 years max. Mm. So it's almost like a log scale of
yeah.
Everything happens, or nothing happens at the beginning, and then things keep happening faster and faster until we end up with now.
Well, you can even see that with today. I mean, even just within our own lifetimes, how much technology has changed. Yeah. So, I mean, you can do the bigger, you could do it the digital age or whatever, but then probably later people are going to be able to divide that up even more, like analog, and then, I don't know. I don't know computers well enough to be able to say things, but, I'm sure that they'd be able to split. And then at that point, you might be even getting, years or months of little tidbits of what people could start to define as ages.
I mean, that's just our kind of, time bias, that we kind of find it very easy to subdivide regions that are close to us, and then the further back, the more it kind of blurs into one big splurge.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Ötzi is from the Neolithic, and it is kind of post-agriculture, but apart from the kind of pigs and goats, there's not really any suggestion that I saw in the film of them having, cereals or any kind of planted crop that they were cultivating.
Yeah, it didn't seem that there was any area for that.
No.
They were kind of in the mountains, so there was no fields or anything.
There's no cows either, which you would have thought, given how pervasive alpine pasture is, that might have been one of the sensible domesticates to have included rather than pigs and goats.
We should probably talk about the baby too. We've just bypassed that, which was this big emotional turn. So he meets on his fairly, maybe midway through his journey or fairly at the beginning half of his journey, he meets what seems to be an older man with a young female who wants to have sex with him, presumably for a baby.
I kind of interpreted that as, some kind of cultural, what would I call it? Like, wife hospitality, that the idea that in some cultures that the accepted cultural norm was for them to spend time with your partner, and that was how things were done. Because I didn't see, or did it suggest that she was coerced?
It didn't suggest that she was coerced. My interpretation was that they wanted a baby, and her partner would have probably been too old to be giving her very viable semen. And so they were taking advantage of having this young buck there.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
I don't know if that was just my female perspective of it, but that's what I thought it was. And then when he wakes up in the morning, he leaves the baby with her, and she looks very happy, and the old man is very happy. Like, they're both like, yes, we got it anyways, a baby.
It usually takes 9 months. This has been sped up. That's great.
I thought that maybe they were a father and daughter, and then that sort of works out those problems.
That could be it too.
Because he was quite a bit older than her, I thought. So
Yeah.
then we don't have to deal with any interpreting why she needed a baby and he couldn't give one.
But the only thing is that, I mean, leaving the baby with her probably was a good idea. She wanted a baby, but she's not
Exactly.
producing milk, so they're going to have the same issues. And they didn't seem to have goats or anything. So I'm not entirely sure how that baby is going to live. Because kind of too young for weaning.
I thought it was interesting that when he sets off, at first he takes a goat with him to feed the baby, but then he lets the baby suckle directly from the goat's teat, and I'm not sure if that's anatomically compatible. I don't know if a baby can get its mouth around a goat's teat like deep enough for that mechanism to work.
Yeah, I don't know.
I grew up on a farm. I know a cow's teat's going to be bigger, but you have to have like quite a long range of motion to draw milk from it, right?
I guess if you kind of, it'll fit perfectly into a kid goat's mouth, which is going to be much longer than a human baby's. I think they needed to have more kind of female archaeologists, or just any archaeologist that knew the history of childcare in the past, and that could have set them right on these kind of slightly weird things that they were doing.
I mean, my instinct would be to make like a rawhide very thin, work it down so it's very thin, and then put the milk in and use it almost like a baster for the baby. That's what I would do if I were ever found myself with a baby on the steeps of the Alps.
And there would have been, obviously at the time, there would have been ways. I mean, this wouldn't have been an uncommon occurrence for a baby to be born and then either its mother to have died, or
the mother to die,
for it to have not been able to kind of latch on or whatever. And that there must have been alternative ways that they'd already worked out for how to give milk to a baby. And I'm sure there's a whole literature somewhere of people looking at the artifactual evidence for what they would have been doing.
I just Googled Neolithic feeding babies, and there's actually been findings of what they think were baby bottles. So. Oh
wow! Made from what? From hide?
No, like bottles, like the same that they're from pottery type thing.
Oh yeah, I saw that paper. And they're in the shape of like animals or something.
Animal shaped.
Yeah, and we know that these guys have pottery, don't we?
Yeah, so that's still dated to after Ötzi. But just because we found it for that time doesn't mean it wasn't around before. Or at least they had the idea of a mechanism between the teat and the baby.
All right, I want to throw something out there. When I was watching this movie, I was drawing strong parallels to the movie Titanic.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
Because we have a similar filmmaking problem, or a similar writing problem, where you are starting with the ending, which you can't change, but then you have to write a way to get up to that ending, right? Because they're both true story. They're both based on true stories, but the actual story of the people involved is the part we don't know. We just know what happened at the end, right?
Right.
And I didn't like this movie, but I did like Titanic, and so I was wondering what they could have done differently in this movie, learning a lesson from Titanic.
Cast Kate Winslet, would that have helped you?
Maybe. Kate Winslet has been in a movie recently about Mary Anning. Did we talk about that one before?
Yeah, Ammonite.
Yeah.
It's not really a Stone Age movie at all, but maybe once we start running out of good Stone Age titles, we can look into that one, because I haven't seen it yet, but I definitely want to see it.
I'm saving it for when I can sit down and really watch it, like a movie night.
Anyway, Titanic also uses the same trope this movie uses, which we already talked about, called the MacGuffin. This is where you have some item that everybody's trying to get, and it doesn't matter what that item is, but it drives the plot, and it could be literally anything. So in this movie, it's Tanaka. What did they call it?
Tanaka.
And in Titanic, it was the big diamond necklace thing, right? And neither of those actually existed in real life, but they were invented for the movie to drive the plot of the movie. And in the end, both of them didn't matter, because they did get them in the end, and then they threw them away. Ötzi threw his Tanaka off the top of the mountain at the end, and old Kate Winslet throws the jewel back into the ocean off the ship at the end. So I thought it was very interesting that these movies, when you think about them that way, are very similar.
Yeah.
And Titanic is twice as long as this movie, so I guess they had a lot more time to have fun, interesting stuff happen. Yeah, actually, I don't know where I was going with this. I thought they were very similar conceptually, and yet I like Titanic and I didn't like this movie.
I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of the kind of search for the MacGuffin. I mean, there's lots of things like that. I guess you could also say, Raiders of the Lost Ark is essentially the same story. They lose the Ark at the end as well after they found it. So yeah, I mean, it's a kind of archetypal story, kind of hero's journey kind of stuff.
Well, I think one of the main differences, and probably why you like Titanic over this one, is that, again, going back to that, we didn't really see there wasn't much character development, and we didn't really get to know any other character but Ötzi.
Yeah.
And even then, we only got to know him in this very small frame of time of his life. We didn't get any other background into him. So it's harder to stay engaged on the long, quiet scenes of, where it's just mostly landscape and stuff, because there's not much happening.
I was watching with my roommate, and she talked about how all the character development happened after everybody died. Like, we're supposed to get emotionally invested by watching him for 10 minutes crying about how much he loved these people, instead of, putting that 10 minutes before, showing how much they love each other while they're alive, and then when they die, we feel it more.
I mean, Josh, what would you do then, do you think, to improve Iceman? Do you think it would help to have had them speak an intelligible language, just have them speak English, and just kind of have suspension of disbelief that we've got some kind of universal translator that's translating them for us, or kind of different motivations for the characters, or what would you change? I'm
not sure. I mean, I think you could go in a few different directions. I certainly don't have a problem with just speaking in English, because it's a movie. It's fun to try and be as accurate as possible, but I mean, we can see that no matter how hard a movie tries, sometimes the harder they try to be accurate, the less accurate they feel, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would have been a different movie, and it would have been a good movie. You could have made a good movie if they were just speaking English. That would have been fine. Or they could have done it this way, but just change the story. I think that for me, the problem is that a revenge story is just not a story I'm interested in. So maybe it's just me. Maybe other people would have liked this movie a lot more.
Well, it just also kind of seems like the revenge was always what it looked like, because of all the men wandering around the Alps having revenge, is that they seem to only be one solo person looking for revenge, another solo person looking for revenge, and they're all killing each other. And there's just not going to be very much human survival through the Neolithic, if that's the case, right? There would have to be more interpopulation violence and aggression, and then a truce would have to be called for a while. I mean, and that's what you even see in modern human populations, two groups are fighting and then a truce is called so that they can you can both build up again and live again, and then something might happen and then you start fighting again, or you might start fighting with somebody else and then you come together because you have a common enemy. And I think it would be more like that and less singular people just wandering trying to kill other singular people.
I think going back to Josh's kind of Titanic analogy, I mean, there's not really, from my understanding of it, there's not really any other kind of story you can tell that ends with your main character getting shot in the back, apart from, a kind of revenge story. I mean, unless, I don't know, it's an accidental death, but then, that doesn't really make for a particularly compelling story either. I can't think of any other kind of narrative frames that would end in the way that we know the Ötzi story actually did.
I think it bothered me that they killed off everybody in the beginning, and then he's getting revenge the whole movie, and like they could have honored him better by having a story arc where his death saves his people, or like most of the movie is him chasing after this valuable artifact, and all the people that died were just collateral damage in the beginning. Maybe like he saves the baby because you can't kill an infant in a movie, but that happens in the first half of the movie. And then after that, where's the emotional investment? All you have is just an angry guy, and then in the end he gets his artifact back, and it's doesn't even matter anymore. Like, it just felt so hollow to just brutally, like, we know that he died, but now to fictionally brutally murder his entire clan. I know they're trying to make him a hero by having him go for revenge, but they could have made him a hero by having him save everybody and maybe die as a martyr or something. Like, the movie was not about people. It was just about angry men killing each other.
Yeah, that's true.
I have to say, though, I thought the music was really good. I really liked the music throughout. And I thought the cinematography was pretty impressive as well, like some of the aerial shots. And
I was about to say that. It was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Aside from all the violence, too, it really made, like, maybe it's just that I've been having a really hectic month with teaching and stuff, but I was like, it seems so quiet and relaxing, like, before the murder and all of that. It seemed like I was like, we should go back to simpler times.
It definitely was quite atmospheric. I liked how they used all the bird song. I mean, I'm not rubbish at recognizing bird song, but they definitely had, European woodpecker in there, which would have been appropriate, and I think they might have had chough in there as well, and some other kind of appropriate birds for the region and the time. And that was, like Kim says, that was quite relaxing just to watch, just listen to bird song in the kind of quiet spaces between the action and the revenge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it looks really great, and it looks especially great because I'm pretty sure it had a pretty low budget. But I noticed this on IMDb. I don't know how reliable it is. It says that the gross worldwide for this movie was $6,719. I can't imagine how much money this movie must have lost.
Ouch.
I would say quite a bit.
The opening weekend in US and Canada was $1,372.
Sheesh, that is bad.
I feel like that's one full theater.
Yeah,
that's really bad.
That's not good.
6,000 global.
Since they were on location the entire time too. I mean,
that makes me feel quite sad actually, because they've obviously put a lot of effort into it, and
I think the movie deserves better than that.
That makes me like it more. Sorry, Josh.
Well, it makes me feel bad for it at least. I mean,
now it's the underdog.
Now it's cult. It's a cult viewing.
Anything else?
I don't have as much to say about this movie because it's not Neanderthals.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and I think we've discussed everything because there isn't interpersonal relationships to discuss or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of.
I think a lot of it comes back to the problem of there not being intelligible dialogue, and so a lot of the things that we could discuss we can't because we don't really know what the filmmakers were trying to make these people's motives, because they weren't as clear as they should have been, perhaps. The thing that annoyed me the most, even though overall I liked it, was that, like you say, they're all just angry men, and it's very difficult to tell them apart. I mean, if they could have given some of them like a fancy hat, or
yes.
Made one of them, have a crooked arm or a limp or something, so that they could be just distinguishable, it would have made things a hell of a lot easier. I mean, there's so much diversity we know was around in the Neolithic. We have, there's lots of evidence for, different skin types, even back then, that there was a lot more diversity in Europe than we would expect from how things are now. So they could have shown that as well and had slightly more diverse casting, and that could have helped to identify individuals as well.
Yeah, and track why people are killing who.
Yeah.
So is Encino Man still our favorite movie?
Forever and always, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely for me.
Yeah, for me too. I still put this one over. I put this one over William, though.
I think I still have the other Iceman at the bottom, and this one above that, then William, and then Encino Man at the top.
I think that this one might be more, in some ways, more realistic than the other Iceman or William. But in terms of just watching it, I would rather watch the other ones. I find them more interesting. This one, not enough happens in it to keep my interest.
Yeah, in terms of entertainment, it's still Encino Man and then the other Iceman for me. In terms of accuracy, this one.
And Encino Man for accuracy.
And Encino Man, yeah.
Are we learning that even scientists are more entertained by the less scientifically accurate movies? Is that what we're learning from this podcast?
I think so.
Yes. As long as it's not too far out there that it starts to propagate major misunderstandings in evolution or history or something. Like if it's minor things, then fine.
We've definitely got some movies like that on the list.
I can suspend my disbelief, no problem, as long as the reason for the suspension is entertaining. Like with Encino Man, I can totally believe that they've dug up a Pleistocene Brendan Fraser in their swimming pool. If that leads to kind of wacky high school hijinks, then that's fine. But having brown bears in a lab in the Arctic for no stated reason, I have a real problem with.
Okay, so what movie are we going to do next?
I would like to suggest Ice Age. I think that's a great film.
Sure.
The first one?
First one, yeah.
We're serious.
Thanks to David Bach for designing our cover art. You can see more of his work at dkbach.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out what Canadian paleoanthropologists are working on at pasc-scpa.ca.